Hello and welcome to another episode of Cybeers. I'm Jack. I'm the CTO at Triskele Labs and your host for today. I'm joined by Richard Grainger, who's a popular figure on the show. Richard, how you going?
Good, Jack. Thanks for having me again.
And today, our guest as well, we've got Chathura on the show. How are you, Chat?
I'm very well, and thank you for having me.
Very nice. Bit of background on Chat. So, director at KPMG, CREST advisory board member, council member, assessor, and CREST fellow. We work together quite closely on CREST.
I love your work too.
ASA fellow, PhD candidate, right? This list is very long, just to let everyone know. You're a non-executive cybersecurity advisory board member as well, a mentor for the Australian Women in Security Network, and finally, you've recently achieved your GAICD, I saw.
Yep, thank you. Yep.
So how's things, Chat? Tell me.
Oh, things going well, and we just, as you know, came back from the Christmas break, and so trying to see what this year looks like.
Very nice. Yeah, we're all busy. Cybersecurity doesn't slow down.
Cybers never stop, hey.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. So today, what I wanted to talk about, keep it pretty general, cybersecurity trends in 2025. So I'm going to cover a whole range of topics, I think. I've got a whole range of questions, and Rich, I'm sure you've got some as well.
Yeah.
On a whole lot of pivotal issues, really.
Yeah, pivotal conversations. Right?
Pivotal conversations.
Yeah.
Off the bat, I want to start with some hot news off the press, right? Yeah. So, DeepSeek. Perhaps not specifically cybersecurity related, but certainly relevant. What are your thoughts? It's obviously coming out of cyber.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting how things turn out, right? And then there's this discussion around, drinking from the, open AI bottle, right? And I recently had a very high level conversation around this. So, it just, you have an organization, you have a tooling, and then you have a really great product, and you can't really not expect for adversaries to take a use of that, right? So I think the whole shenanigan is around that. Potentially, who's on the IPs and things like that. Has there been any IP theft happen over there? But regardless, I think, while Western countries scrutinize around regulations and then putting guardrail, there are some other regimes have the power to embrace innovation more and more and, just beat everyone, ahead of the game. So that has been happened, and this is any surprise as well. So I think I say watch this space.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, some of the common things that I'm seeing people saying here, right? Obviously, DeepSeek, it's coming out of China. So lots of issues from a privacy perspective about just sending your data over there. But then this is quite contexted against the fact that it's also open source.
Yeah.
So you can run it locally, right?
Correct.
So it kind of makes it a win-win, really.
I agree. It's a good contribution to the open source security science community as well, right? Because, you can actually build it locally and run it, I haven't done it myself, but I believe, you should be able to train it on your data set as well, right? But on the same time, regardless of it's made in China or not, like, it's not the only thing it's made out of China, right? So true. You might have CCTVs, right? You might have telco equipment. You might have whole sort of things, even chipset in your laptop, right? So how far we want to go down the rabbit hole, right? So I think, end of the day, it's about understanding what are the risks around it. Do you have a concern if your data get access to a particular third party rather than, any adversarial country, right? I think, if a adversarial country is after you, they're going to get you anyway, right? Yeah. We all in cyber, we know what you can actually do is to make them work harder to get to you or get to someone else, right? But if you're willing to willingly give away your data or whatever you have to a third party, then it's no longer yours, right? That's the cost of doing business in this world, right?
Very true.
If you're not trusting a nation, then what nations you be trusting, right? So I think it's come down to your own threat modeling and risk management and how you play.
Yeah, very true. Rich, do you have a digital forensics perspective? What are your thoughts on DeepSeek or more generally AI use in cyber for offense or defense?
So, I've had a play with it, just sort of putting obfuscated output into it to see what the tools report back in terms of understanding what command line is, what it does, and things like that. Had very mixed results on it. I don't think we're anywhere near the place where AI or these LLMs are going to replace forensics, because you always need to have someone validate what the interpretation of evidence is. And if you get it wrong, like it can have pretty bad impacts in organizations. Like, cool, we've sorted containment, we're all good to go based on this output, and then it turns out actually that was wrong and we're not good. So I think we're very far from that. I know a lot of the forensic tools are looking to integrate this sort of AI stuff into there to perhaps assist investigators in terms of analysing findings. So one we use, which is fairly popular, is Magna Axiom, and they've got like a little add-on now for AI. So I think it's going to be watch this space to see if it's truly something that is going to become more mainstream. I think in forensics, I don't see it in the immediate term, but perhaps in the long term. And I think going back to what you said about having these kinds of things locally on your own machines, like perhaps that's going to be an interesting project, is to be able to have your own LLM for forensics and continually be able to feed it information and train it on your cases without having to worry about that very private information potentially being shipped off to a third party.
Yeah, and on top of that, I was playing with around like a deepfake usage in like adversarial capacity around like how we could weaponize that for social engineering and things like that, right? So rather than just using online tooling, you can build your own in a lab, but it's expensive process, time-consuming process, right? So I think that's where people just jump on online tooling to get the job done faster.
It's easy.
Yeah.
True. And I guess that's kind of the natural progression of it too. Products will come along that are cheaper, and that's kind of what a lot of the fuss has been made about here, right?
Correct.
They've managed to find a way somehow that they can match the performance of existing LLMs at a much cheaper price point. So I'm sure that cycle will continue. It'll become more available and probably more comprehensive as well, right? You touched on something earlier, which is a nice segue into another topic I want to talk about, which is quite important, I think, for 2025. Something that's on everyone's lips at the moment, which is operational technology, right? You spoke about we often buy lots of technology that comes out of various foreign countries, and we often have an inherent trust of this technology. What do you think some of the big ticket items for OT are in 2025, right? Perhaps fundamentals?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting area, I think, in this modern climate, right? So, you might have all these air-gapped systems, but then somebody somewhere in the organization needs some dashboarding, right? So therefore, this true air-gapping is not necessarily exist.
Got to be a good dashboard with all the fancy graphs.
Exactly,
colors,
right? I don't think
on a big screen.
I don't think anybody has time to plug in a flash drive here and then forensically copy it over there just to validate there's nothing there. Connect to a IT side of things and then upload into iPad or something, right? So there's connectivity everywhere, and even when vendors are making OT products, right? So they're conscious of that connectivity rather than anything else, right? It's like you have this $20 million, maybe $2 million Tomra sort of a machine connect to like a little Raspberry Pi W, give you like an internet access and you connect to Wi-Fi, right? So that I think that IT OT convenience is the most challenging part, right? So people, as an industry, we want to go down that convergence path, but then that has those risks as well, right? So that's one thing. And then the other thing I find fascinating is that within the OT environment, there are security vendors who actually build security solution for this OT sort of a segregated networks, and they're getting popped left, right, and center, right? When your security tooling of the edge security tooling got popped, what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Right? I think that's a very interesting point. And then it's happening since, it's constantly happening even this year, last year. And, since I think historically it's been happening, but 2003, 2004, 2025, I think there's a huge, degree of like the threshold of happening of these orders coming out and adversarial usage has been tremendously increased over time, right? I think that's a very for me, it's an interesting area to be. It's not that, someone in trouble or anything, but then it's just like the sheer volume of how things coming up, and then how actually adversarial is using this O-Day sort of a vulnerabilities to get into the infrastructure before even the patch is released, right? So I think that very fascinating. While I love the offensive cyber aspect of it, and I do appreciate the incident response aspect of it as well, majority of the time in recent days, this O-Day exploitation come out of an incident response, right? So if you look at, very recent, this firewall edge system vulnerabilities, it's coming from an incident response investigation of a data exfiltration, right? And then turn out the initial access vector is from popping a firewall, right? I think it's very remarkable how that blue team, red team, IR offensive capabilities come into the picture, right? So it's truly fascinating.
It is very interesting. Worth mentioning, I think, topical news on that. In that area from the last few weeks, the ACSC released their Secure by Demand, which for anyone that doesn't know, they obviously previously have released their Secure by Design. We want to design these things securely in the first instance, but many of them already exist, right? So for those category of items, what can we do after the fact? They've already been designed, but they're obviously insecure. So what controls can we kind of add to that, right? Do you have any ideas of these key controls for OT?
I'm all right for secure by design, right? Like it's a good concept, very hard to implement.
It's ideal, but
exactly right. That's
difficult.
the ideal world, and if you can implement it, yes, kudos to you. I think you can go from like another extra layer around secure by component. Right. So what's this design, right? So you design of a component, and then at a component level, you validate that, and then you put it in place, right? For example, I know, we might touch base this later in the chat, but if you look at assets where you can't touch, pretty much like, OT assets, things like that in the space, right? So that's secure by component design need to become, because once you fire it up, you just literally fire and forget. Right? You can't just go there to patch it, right? If there's a backdoor or, somebody already have access to that particular chipset or a device in some sort of a covert way, you just need to, watch it burn, right? You can't do anything about it, right? So in that case, I think whilst I appreciate the secure by design, I think we need to go that extra mile around that secure by component sort of a level.
Agreed. Any comments, Rich? Any thoughts on operational technology?
No, I think we've kind of already discussed it, but I think a lot of it is around just sort of the basics. Again, like at the end of the day, OT is, systems, and a lot of the principles that we would use to secure traditional IT systems is the same. So you mentioned before the sort of firewalls being exploited. It seems like every month. I know you're across a lot of the bulletins that we send out as well to our SOC clients, and it seems like every fortnight there's a new. It sort of rotates between a couple of vendors, but there's always a new 0-day coming out that's been patched, and it's allowed threat actors access this perimeter infrastructure.
Yeah,
and I guess just making sure that you're on top of that, because it's sort of the weak link in the organization is all these ingress points into the network, and just making sure they're secure, not having your firewalls admin panel exposed to the internet. You're patching it regularly. If a 0-day does come out and there's a gap between that being identified and you patching it, doing a threat hunt to make sure it wasn't exploited. There's a lot of sort of just basic things I think that can improve an organization's
I think
posture.
I love that one. Admin interfaces on the internet. Why?
In case you need to access it from a boat
Convenience.
somewhere.
If you look at those recent, like the popping, right? So, don't call me on this number. I think let's not go get out ourselves. I think majority of those numbers came from actor exploiting the exposed admin interface of a security device. Why?
Yeah,
Right.
most of the time.
And some PLC or some OT system running with a default password.
Yeah.
Why? right? I think that's where that secure by demand things comes in, right?
Yep.
Because organizations may not necessarily security aware, right? So they're running a business, right? Security is like an overlay. But if the vendor is going that extra mile again to enforce control around, like you can't use the default password, right? When you log into the first time admin, you change it.
Yeah.
So at least the organization need to put like admin one,
Yeah.
you know, right? Like add a letter, like, you know,
Yeah.
you can set this requirement, right? As a vendor, I think it's your responsibility to provide that, right? I think one of the best thing about, you know, these devices, it's like no logs, low crime, right? So in incident response, we bump into, you know, clients where they don't have logs,
Yep.
right?
All the
Especially
time.
around these assets. How do we even extract the log, right? We may not necessarily, the incident responders or digital forensic people who actually responded to these incidents may not necessarily have the expertise to mess around with these OT assets because it's a whole different, you know,
Skill set, yeah,
protocols
absolutely.
and how things work. But then if the vendor has the opportunity to, hey, this is how you extract the logs, right? And this is a special protocol or this is a special function, you can extract the logs and then they're non-tampered. If you can provide that assurance, then I think the life of incident response people and then even the organization is going to be way more easier.
Yeah.
Right? 100%. So you create that complexity and then that complexity become a problem, right?
Yep. Very true. Very insightful. And another important topic I think would be remiss not to talk about when we talk about 2025 trends, something that's been a huge issue for the last, 4, 5, several years, especially if we talk about the availability of logs in a post-incident investigation.
Oh yeah.
Ransomware. Where do we think that's going in the next year? Any changes or same old exploitation of same old things?
Well, don't have a crystal ball, but I think, it's going to continue.
Yeah.
Right?
As long as it's making money.
Yeah. And then, there's always that point around extortion and double extortion, right? And then that's going to continue as well. Because for an organization, if they have a good backups, things like that, they can always recover, arguably. Always recover to a point, right? If the backups has been immutable, then you get into a point what is actually mutable, right? So that's a whole different story. And then once the data is out, you need to know whether the data is out first, right? So sometimes you don't even know. And then they've been published. So then that comes with a whole heap of other repercussions, right? And then you might have legal ramification around it. You have other obligations around it, right? So ransomware ecosystem for organizations are, I think, becoming more complicated and complex as well, right? When regulators come and say, you need to do ABC things if you're impacted by ransomware. So now you had to deal with the government as well as the regulators, other than just not just dealing with, insurers, ransomware people, and then incident responders, right? So you're adding different entities. Again, you're trying to complex it. But then, organizations like ACSC could step up there and provide some guidance around, this is how you would do it. This is how you would approach it. I think they're doing a good job around providing decent set of baseline playbooks, right? So if your organization don't have these playbooks, well, go to ACSC website and start somewhere, right? Right. I think, you need to tweak it to your organization, right? Tweak it to your purpose. But if you have nothing, then don't complain. Use what you have and build on it, right? So something is better than nothing.
Indeed. And one of the most recent, government requirements, as you say, that they put in place that might slow down or change people's considerations or perceptions if they're paying a ransom, mandatory ransomware notification.
Yes.
Any thoughts on this one, Rich? Do you think it's going to be an overall positive thing for the Australian security ecosystem?
I think it's going to be a good statistic for the government to be able to track. I think having true figures on how profitable, how impactful ransomware is in Australia, it will be very beneficial. I'm wondering if this is the first step in terms of more regulation around ransomware payments and things like that, whether the government's going to try going down the path of sanctioning or completely blocking ransomware payments. Which I think will be an interesting situation for organizations that, you mentioned backups before as being a great way to recover. What about if the backups are gone and they didn't have any? So
Yeah.
we've had clients in the past where it's kind of the situation is pay a ransom or go out of business essentially because they can't continue to operate. So I think if the government does expand this and go further down that path, what is there going to be an exemption process for organizations that don't have a choice, or is it just going to be a hard no, and then organizations are essentially stuck either trying to rebuild their data from scratch or kind of go, all right, it's just too hard, so we'll just stop operating.
Yeah, because I've been doing a few tabletop sort of an exercise with C-level folks and the boards during the last year.
Very popular.
And I kind of like it more and more and as well because, it's quite fun. And, majority of the time when we involve the board and, roll the simulations through, their default stand is we will not pay.
Yeah.
Right? And then, that's the stance. I think that's a good stance, right, as a country. Because if all the organizations put it down to that point, then, you actually removing that lucrativeness within the market, right? So then ransomware actors, if they can't monetize you, why would they put effort on you, right? You need to understand they're not doing it for fun and games, right? So they're running a business as well, right? So they need to make money out of it. So if the customer or the impact person, whoever, that entity is, there's no any willingness to pay, then you can't monetize it.
Yeah.
Right? It's a long way to go though, right? The organization need to have some solid stance on if you're not paying, we better have A, B, C, D, E, whole alphabet ready.
Yeah.
But if that tone set from the top in the board saying, we will not negotiate, full stop. As a management, it's your job to make sure that we have sufficient control in place to recover from it. I think that stance will be a great stance to start.
Yeah.
Right. So I've been seeing this attitude in the boards changing, and if you look at the the AICD magazine, last month, there's cyber everywhere.
More and more.
Yeah, I'll be even surprised. Oh wow, that's interesting. Right.
Yeah.
So
I was going to actually ask you about this very topic, right? You've obviously done the training recently, the AICD, as have I, and cyber does feature quite prominently now as a board topic. What do you think the relationship is between some of these senior leaders, board members of companies who obviously, often won't have a technical background, they need to consider cyber? I mean, it speaks to me about the importance that cyber is not just a technical problem, right? You need the governance and the risk aspects too. What do you think are kind of the most important areas there for leaders?
Correct. I think, if you look at cyber, right, so it's a not a technical problem, we agree, right? And then there's a pass in the ball, it's a business problem. Sure, it can be a business problem, but it's also a people problem, right? So, and it's a culture problem, right? So people's behavior drive the culture. So therefore, it's a people problem, right? Which leading into a business problem. And, from a board perspective, even C-level point of view, they don't necessarily need to be technical to understand this, right? So they're governing the business, they need to understand the risk. They need to set that appetite. So how things should work is, they should be able to have access to technical people who can translate, right? And then provide that advice which they could rely on. I think that's what I really love about, doing even this tabletop and working with risk and audit committees and the boards around, providing that advice. I think, there's a gap in that particular
a bridge that needs to be
area,
built. Right?
Yeah.
There's two sides need to be
correct,
joined.
right? So the boards now with AICD is doing a great job around that education piece, right? So more and more people in that influential positions understand cyber. They also understand that they need some trusted advice, right? I think that's a great place to be in this climate.
Yep,
Right.
agreed. Although it does highlight, another problem that's quite topical: the skills shortage.
All right. Oh, well,
Where are the people to give this advice? Right. It's good for consulting companies, but to hire internally it can be quite difficult.
Correct. And then again, then it's come down to that fundamental problems, right? We've been doing pen testing you've been doing IR, right? Quite a long time. So the challenge, I'm making an assumption, right? But I think it's
he looks pretty
I'm
young,
starting to
doesn't
get
he?
grey hairs. So,
right,
yeah.
right. So the thing is this, right? Like we always have the challenge of we don't have problem of finding people. The problem is finding the right skilled people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, you can find 1,000 pen testers, not a problem, right? But what's that good look like, right? Similarly, you need to have that right person who's advising the board around these kind of things, right? If they don't understand what's going on, they make things up. So then whole organization at risk, right? So more and more you go up, if you kind of don't understand these deep technicals, then you can't really provide advice on ChatGPT, right? Because we all know, we already discussed this, that delusion within LLM, right? They make things up,
Yeah.
right? And then they make things up in a very real way, right? So they even gave names to this kind
They're
of
very
things,
confident.
right?
That's right. It does sound quite believable.
I use ChatGPT, right? So I was summarizing something, and then funny you mentioned that secure by demand paper, right? I was looking at some aspect of it, and then it says organization should use threat modeling frameworks such as Might Attack. That's not a threat modeling framework, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't know,
Yeah.
you just tell that to somebody else.
Yeah.
They trust you,
Yeah.
right? So there's no any zero trust at that level because, they don't have time to seek advice from 10 different people and then understand, what this person's saying, what that person's saying, right? So that trusted advisor need to understand this kind of thing, and then that's their job, right? So I think, it is not about answering the question of does CISO have to be technical or not, but then this external advisor, whoever this trusted person, need to be super technical. As well as they need to be able to articulate that into a business risk language, right? If you get that wrong, a lot of things gonna go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? That's my personal view.
Yeah. Well, I do know one method of making sure we can at least improve the skills shortage problem, and that is starting people young. I believe you have something to say on that topic. Cyber for you is a bit of a family affair, which I love. I love it.
Yeah, well, it was a bit of a coincidence, right? I kind of push him towards as a kid,
To be clear for our listeners, we're talking about the fact that Chat's son is quite involved in security conferences and does presentations.
When he was young, I gave him lockpicks and things like that to play with, right? There's no any expectation just to play with this, break those clear locks and things like that, right? And then I just he may be not interested, that's it, right? But then I went to B-side Melbourne year before, right? And then, he was playing in the lockpicking village area, and then he has some class to attend, a Saturday, right? And then I was like, hey, let's go. And then someone in the village was like, oh, you can't take the kid? I was like, huh?
What do you mean?
Okay, enlighten me. And then he was like, look at the scoreboard. I was like, oh, okay. I was like giving a call, hey, cancel the class. We're not going to come today. Right? I think that's that moment I provided the tooling. I set the mindset, but what I didn't do was that guidance. Right? I never sit with him to show him, how this lock been picked. You need to try this here, right? But then, going to that conference, sitting with people who actually want to help kids get into these kind of things, right? Or not kids, people in general, right? And then, that changes it, right? So he had that influence, and then it just worked. And then, he won first place there, and then, that's an encouragement, right?
Yeah.
And then ever since, he want to try things out, and physical security that move into a little bit of cyber as well. So he liked the pen testing part. So he's doing some hack the box stuff.
Yeah, nice.
A pen tester lab. I got him a subscription, right? And then see how it's going. So he quite like it. And then, he talked with my friends on Signal, right? And then they helped him. So he did a couple of presentations. And one of the other thing was he did Kids Secure Day presentation, and one of the feedback I got from the organization and from the audience was that kids love it because, they can see it's not like some big person comes and talking. It's just someone like them comes and talking, right? I think that's a good place to start. So,
I agree.
Start young.
I think it's a really great initiative.
Yeah, thank you.
And it is all part of building the skills here in Australia too that we need to combat these threats of the future.
Correct.
It's really great. So
I think, in cyber, right? Yeah, not just in cyber, in anything you do, if you're truly passionate about it, then you're going to go a long way, right? So similarly, cyber, it's that because it's different to what it was yesterday. It's going to be different to what it's tomorrow, literally and figuratively, right? So this is like a game. You can't take it, right? It's not about doing a job, right? If you're thinking it's like a 9-to-5 thing, forget it, it's not for you, right? So it's not that day, whatever time. It's just about your mindset to learn what's happening here. I put effort to learn. It's not that I have to put the effort. I really, really need to put the effort because I can't sleep not knowing how this is happening, right? So that's the mindset you need in order to be successful in this business, right?
Agreed.
And, there's no any secret sauce behind every successful people in cyber. They're just hard work. Right?
Yep.
Try to put down to understand that. I think, that's. So it's an interesting area to be. In
Very
my
true.
view.
Yep. Well, moving on from those topics, I do want to, before we finish up, spend some time talking about one more particular thing that, at least on the surface sounds quite interesting, but I must admit I know very little about, right? And this is your PhD topic, which I believe is cyber and space intelligence. So I think we're going to have to start with you simply explaining what this is and what it involves.
All right. So I'll explain from the beginning, right?
Perfect.
So
Perfect for me.
Yeah, me too.
When I started it, right, and then literally I had no idea, right? Literally had no idea of what I'm doing, and then I talked to my supervisor, and I was like, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, and they're like, if you're sure about what you're doing, it doesn't call research. I was like, okay, so it's okay to not know, right? And then explore. So that in general, in my view, PhD is about unbiased person's opinion around things, right? So the ability to question why it's purple. Oh, let's see. What if I put this? Oh, that happened. What if I put that, right? So that's the whole research methodology kind of thing going there. But if you put that into the context of the space, we have assets, space assets since eons ago, right? So 1960s. They're still operating, right?
Yeah.
At the time, I don't think people considered cyber. But still, they're there, right? And the key aspect of that is, in the modern day, when it comes to warfare and things like that, someone can weaponize it, right? So if you look at recent development around, Black Hat, DEFCON conferences, you put that, satellite hacking village or, space conferences, there's more and more traction coming into the space and then the satellite security area. But you also need to understand security costs money.
Oh, yeah.
Not just money, right? Like here, if you want to put security here on a computer, it's going to cost money. You wouldn't really bother how big the security component going to be because we have space here.
Yeah.
But now in the context of that, put it in a satellite, right? It's a teeny tiny thing, right? And then what are the security equipment you need to put in there? Let's say you put it there. One of the other challenge in a satellite or a space asset is the power. Right?
Yeah, of course.
In a computer, security take more power than the functionality itself, right? For example, simple plain, 1 TB hard disk versus a same hard disk encrypted, right? So you need more power consumption in order to have that security thing, right? So security costs money, security costs space, security costs power, right? So those are 3 ingredients of security. And in a space asset, they're very limited, right? So last thing we want is put some security and then drain the battery by 40%. right? So then you lose the asset.
And saying that, if it turns off, that's probably pretty secure.
Yeah, exactly. I can't access it, so then no one can as well, right?
Is that the space equivalent of an agent taking up too much CPU power?
Yeah.
This battery.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So in here, then we'll be like, okay, let's add more CPU, let's add more memory. But it's difficult to an asset around that, right? So then security in cyber, security in space assets are very challenging. It's not that engineers or the organizations don't want to do it. Sometimes the awareness part is lacking as well. I think it's general. It's not just space industry. It's just like everywhere. It's like, oh, let's click on this phishing link anyway, right? So that's a whole different story. But in that industry, so you're working with really smart people. They just want to get the job done, right? So their focus is that. So similarly, they also on a timeline. I need to get this out of the orbit before that person, right? So there's a race. So security trying to slow things down, right? So that's a problem with security, right? It's not the problem with the other industries. So you have that. So what I'm trying to do is to figure out, there's excellent work out there. Some of my supervisors actually build upon things, and then there's a great community of cyberspace experts working together to tackle in this challenge. And then when you say space domain is not just out there, you have users, ground, and then you have, of course, space. And then I think the most important thing is the integration layer.
Yeah.
Right? Which typically has firewalls, APIs, and things like that. How these things communicate, right? It's just a computer out there. That's pretty much it, right? I know it sounds cool. That's one of the reasons I'm doing it, to be honest.
That's right.
But then,
Great name.
it's about applying the same concept. The concepts are different. Context is different, right? So figuring out a model framework, I'm still at early stage, right? To do cyber threat intelligence better or customized way to improve resilience in the space domain assets or space domain in general, right? So that's the goal. That's the goal at this stage. I don't know how it's going to turn out, right? So one of the comment my professors make was that it's okay to change, right? You have that opportunity to change because, that's the whole point of doing the research, right? That unbiased person's view.
Yeah, you don't know which paths
Exactly.
are going to lead you where.
Correct. You think you're going there, but you might end up going to somewhere else because you thought this place belonged to someone else, right? I think that's the beauty of the research, where it's creating that knowledge, right, which hasn't created before. So you might think you're gonna go there, but you end up going to other places. Just like alchemy, how all things started, turn everything into gold and live forever. Oh well, we haven't achieved that objective, but it led us to today, right? I think that's the best part of this research and PhDs in general.
Awesome. That's a really good description.
That I'm trying to make academics look cool.
It's interesting to think about the fact that even something that seems so foreign with technologies that obviously don't exist in our traditional networks or our day-to-day lives can still be quite applicable to the same concepts that we already know, especially when we talk about similar technologies down on here at the ground that need to speak to the technology up there.
Yeah,
right?
like, for me, I don't think it's different. I don't think it's like a whole new thing. It's just the same thing, different concept. Right?
Yeah. Maybe some different problems to
Yeah,
solve,
exactly.
but for the
There's
same reasons,
whole
right? Using a lot
different-
of the similar tools.
Whole different in like individual problems in that sector, right? Like, here you can patch that computer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you really can't, because
Probably can't afford too much downtime.
it's far away.
Long way away.
So this is sometimes you come up with like really interesting situations. So then you actually think about life in general, right? So I'll give you one example. So we have the power to technology to mine asteroids, right? So we can shoot a rocket, send a robot to go into an asteroid somewhere there in the solar system or even beyond, just dig it and then get the sample, come back to Earth. right?
It's sounding too much like that movie, Don't Look Up.
Yeah, it is. That sounds like a movie, but it's real, right? So this is the thing, right? So I was on like a conversation like that within a group around that. They did that. And then, in our daily life, we talk with organizations who can't get rid of their 2003 machine. Like, seriously?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right?
True. The spectrum
Exactly.
of possibilities
That's
is
the-
enormous.
100%, right?
enormous.
So that's the spectrum we're
Yep.
looking at.
Yeah.
Right? So we have the power to do that, but we don't have power to get rid
yeah.
of that.
Or we do have power, and perhaps we just don't care enough.
Exactly.
it's
So
too
that's that
hard.
determination.
Yeah.
Should I bother? No, it's not my problem.
Is it worth it?
Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
What am I
So
gonna
that's
get
that's
out of this?
I think that's the key challenge.
A good
right?
point. Good
You
point.
know, another thing, right? It's the limitation is our mindset, right? So I always tell my teams that the limitation of the attack is the limitation of the imagination of the attacker.
Good offensive
That's
concept.
it, right? So, but in a same mindset, from a defender point of view, if you can't think of why I should change or should I need to change or I can't be bothered, then, well, there's no change, right? So whatever you're not changing is you choosing.
Amazing. Very good. And I think a very good coverage of quite an interesting and niche topic in general.
you.
Look, we're coming to time here at the end, so I want to give you the opportunity. Are there any projects you're working on or any particular groups that you're involved with right now that you'd like to talk about? Anything that's particularly important for you that you're going to be doing things large with in 2025, and not-for-profit organizations or training courses, certifications, conferences, whatever it might be?
I think, I continuously would love to engage within that, mentor sort of activities I'm doing out of my own time. And of course, I'll be, working with you and then the other folks with the CREST more and more.
What's
and
happening in
I
that
think,
space?
what we're doing at CREST, it's impactful. And in this climate, we need that sort of oversight and assistance to regulate us more and more. So I think I'll be busy on those kind of things as well as, the general life. So 2 kids and life goes on.
Excellent. Very nice. I think probably the big ticket item there that CREST has been talking about for a while and is now gaining a lot of traction outside of that and a lot of different conversations is professionalisation, right?
Ooh.
Yeah. Do you think we'll follow the UK model, what they're kind of doing at the moment, or do you think we should do something a bit different? It's
I
hard to
don't
know,
think
isn't
I'm
it?
qualified to
That's fair
talk
enough.
about that. But I think, the thing is this, right? So we have really smart people working on that aspect of it. I think we should let them do it. And then the other thing is, like organizations like, SES, they have certain baselines around this, right? I know CREST did some work in other countries around professionalization, right? So that work is already there. So you may not necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. I'm okay for everybody to customize the wheel. You might need different wheel tire for off-road, different wheel for race. Yeah,
Fancy
sure.
rims.
Right. But then, you have that substance. Get the substance. You don't need to spend time to figure it out from the scratch. Get the
Especially if
substance.
it's being measured and you can see it's working.
Correct, exactly. If that working there, then hypothetically, it's a higher chance that it will probably work here as well, right? So I don't know what the future hold, but CREST is a good organization which contributed to the community in number of countries to get this professionalism part right. I think, there's an opportunity for us to consider that model here as well.
Agreed. And I think on that note, it's probably something that is good to leave it on. So thank you very much, Chat, for coming in today. Thank you, Rich, for the conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.
And
Jack
we'll speak
and
again
Rich.
next time.
Yeah. Cheers.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Until next time. Cheers.